Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to Evolving Consciousness. I'm your host Purushottam, and in today's video, we are going to talk about the three hacks to become fearless. The three hacks to sort of become alien to this emotion called fear. Now, before we dive into the main crux of the subject, the main crux of the matter, a slight disclaimer to begin with. Now, most of us, when we hear this word fearlessness, we probably would have looked at ton of videos in YouTube wherein there are a lot of motivational speakers talking about how can we become fearless and how we can own the world, own our space, and all sort of aligned subjects, right? But today's video is not going to be about a short-term recipe, a short-term remedy, which will sort of give you a motivational spike for a short amount of time and then which will eventually die down. Now today's video is going to be a little deep, and the essence, the more active aspect of today's video is going to be aimed at understanding the mechanics of fear and coming up with a more pragmatic solution which is going to be lasting with us forever. Not a short-term solution which is based on false positive thoughts and false positive belief systems. Now, to begin with, we should also make a very subtle distinction between being fearful and being wise. Because most of us, when we talk about being fearless, right, some of us confuse it with foolishness. Now, let me give you an example to illustrate. Now, suppose you see some YouTube video, you see some random YouTube video, and you are suddenly filled with tons of motivation, and you declare to the world that you are fearless. And in the process of doing that, you do some very foolish activity, right? You try to go and play with the live wire, and you go in the road and start dancing, right? Now, this is an exaggerated view of what fearlessness is, because let's understand there are fears which serve us. Now, let's say that we completely eradicate the fear of death. Now, somebody might go up in the terrace and you may say that I don't have any fear of death, and he may jump, right? Now, this is not fearlessness, this is foolishness. So, we need to be very careful when we approach this concept of fearlessness, because there are certain fears which serve us and there are certain fears which impede us. We are going to talk about the latter category of fears which impede us. In the sense, things which sort of impede our natural actions, natural proactive actions and conduct. Because let's understand the number one reason, the number one emotion each one of us is hijacked with in today's modern days and times is fear. And there's a beautiful understanding here that when we talk about fear, the only thing, when we think about this emotion called fear, we might think about some drastic event, some catastrophic event which will lead us to fear. But fear is more subtler than that. Fear can be very subtle. Fear of failure, fear of success, fear of being embarrassed, fear of being disrespected. There are many subtler manifestations of fear. And fear is one of those petrifying emotions which sort of freezes us in so many different ways. The number one reason for procrastination is not laziness, but it's fear of failure. This is backed by modern neurological and psychological researches. Now let's talk about the three hacks through which we can eradicate fear, and if not eradicate, sort of reduce the amount of fear which we all are sort of impeded with at the conscious and at the unconscious level. Also, the three things which I'm going to talk about, and the last point which I'm going to talk about, is sort of the ultimate hack towards fearlessness. So let's get started with the first point. Now, firstly, we need to understand the mechanics of fear. It was beautifully said by Franklin Roosevelt that the biggest thing we need to fear is fear itself. And if you think about it, fear is mostly hallucinations. I like to call fear the entire word fear. It can be considered as an acronym wherein each letter of the word has a particular definition. Fear, F-E-A-R, can be called as false, F for false, E for evidence, A for appearing, R for real. False evidence appearing real. Now, even if you reflect upon your own childhood, right, you see a horror movie and all of a sudden, for a coincidence, let's say there's a coincidence that the lights goes off, and you have this weird premonitions, weird hallucinations that you see someone standing across. Now, this is a very amusing example, but there are more subtler examples of this. Now, suppose as a child you try to deliver a speech or you gave an allocution, you participated in an allocution competition and you were sort of embarrassed, you couldn't perform at your peak. You sort of goofed up the entire setting. Now that memory stays with you for an entire lifetime. And now maybe 10 or 15 years have passed from that event, but still that memory continues to haunt you. And every time you think of a setup where public speaking and allocation is sort of a requirement, or your work demands you to do a presentation, you are suddenly frozen from within. You suddenly don't feel like going and facing it because this huge rush of fear, because you know how bad you felt back then in your childhood. Now, one thing you'll realize that every time you stop yourself from doing what you fear, you are essentially increasing the intensity of your fear towards that thing. It's like adding fuel to the fear. Hence, it was beautifully told by Franklin Roosevelt that the number one thing we need to fear is fear itself. And one thing you'll notice that every time you did what you feared, that fear shrunk within you and you became more powerful, more confident from within. Now, this is an absolute no-brainer. But one thing we miss out with is the fact that most of our fears are hallucinations. Once we understand the fallacy of our own thoughts, once we understand the futility of our own fear mechanisms, we will try to understand the root cause of it. And when we understand that this is all hallucinations, then we will not give a damn about the fear. The fear will still approach you. If there is someone out there who claims to be absolutely fearless, there can be only two possibilities. Either the person is enlightened or the person is lying. Because being fearless, the absolute state of fearlessness, this is not some very normal state. You can present yourself to be very confident. You can present yourself to be an exuberant personality. But even those so-called confident, so-called jovial and cheerful people have fears. Anyone who is sort of accustomed to the material conditioning of life will face fear. Because you understand this fallacy of fear, that most of the fears are hallucinations, you will suddenly wake up to the reality that I am living in an illusion. And once you realize that you are in a dream, now let's say you're sleeping and you are caught up in a very scared dream, right? Scary dream. The dream will end, and as soon as you get up from the dream, you feel a sigh of relief. The reason you feel a sigh of relief is because you understood that that was just a dream. Most of us, consciously or unconsciously, are living in an illusion, a mirage of our own thoughts, which probably has nothing to do with reality. It was said that 90% of our fears are mere hallucinations. And if you look at the root cause of anxiety, fear of something which might happen in the future, now this fear is not serving us. Fear is essentially crippling us to take the right actions, to do the rightful activities. And the number one reason for stress is also fear. Fear of losing out on something. Once you understand this empowers you deep within, from deep within, that you're being scared of something which didn't even exist, was just a makeup of your own mind. Your mind was playing games with you. Now, this was the number one hack, basically understanding the fallacy of fears. And the number two point, which is sort of connected to how you can become more, how you can progress towards becoming more fearless, is this. the more you act on the things which scare you, and the more you know that those things are some things which you need to work on, right? Because there are several things in our life which we know that this is something which is lacking within me, and the reason I am not taking any proactive action on those things is because I'm scared, because I'm feared of rejection, I'm scared of failure. Fear of failure is an absolute impediment to our proactive action. And this is a particular emotion which probably the entire humanity is infected with. Now, whenever we understand this, that every time we stop ourselves from doing what we are scared of, we are enhancing the fuel of the fear, and the next time is going to be even more difficult. Now, I'll give you my own example, right? So, I was someone who had a good level of oratory skills. I always had a good bandwidth of vocabulary. I had rich diction because of my love of books. But there was a certain level of discomfort, because this is a very common discomfort. I mean, there was one very peculiar thing about me, that whenever I wanted to deliver a speech in front of an audience, before reaching the stage, I would feel a lot of fear. But as soon as I stepped onto the stage, it almost felt that I transformed into a different personality and I owned the stage. And I literally became very passionate about public speaking. I am also was a part of Toastmasters Club, wherein I won a lot of accolades in competitive public speaking. Now, the reason I brought in my example was there were times where I goofed up, but I realized this very subtle aspect, and this realization didn't come from reading any book. This realization came from experience, because every time I went up there, I became a little better. Every time I faced my fears, the fear was shrinking within me. Now, this is an absolute no-brainer, but we don't give a lot of attention to this, right? And as they say, common sense is not so common these days. The more you take action towards your fears, the more it is going to die down and the more empowered you feel. Now, this can be applied to so many different aspects, so many different ball games. And you probably can introspect in your own understanding, like what are the things which scare me, and every time you move towards your things which scare you, you are essentially growing into a better version. Now, also we need to distinguish between things which are serving as a good fear and things which are not serving as a good fear. Majority of us are scared of certain elements which probably have nothing to do with reality. Now, even the fact of uploading videos in YouTube, when I started off uploading videos in YouTube, now it's a very foolish assumption or a foolish expectation to have that everybody is going to applaud my videos. They probably would be also critics of it. There are people who recognize the good content I am uploading, but they are also going to be cynics. Now, if I was going to be scared of the people who are critical or cynical of my videos, I would probably never take the attempt or the effort to make videos and upload them. Now, this is a gross example of how fear impedes us, because we think the fear of failure or the fear of humiliation or the fear of criticism is so much common in nowadays times that anything which we want to do, we avoid doing it or we postpone doing it because we are so scared of public opinion. But if you look at the history makers, if you look at the legends of industry, they never cared about what others thought about them. They followed their heart fearlessly. Now, I would like to talk about Srila Prabhupada, the founder Acharya of International Society of Krishna Consciousness. Prabhupada was a person who was considered to be an absolutely fearless preacher of this entire concept of Krishna consciousness. Prabhupada used to always walk like this, an absolute posture of confidence was exuded from his demeanor, from his body language. But his confidence was not coming from a place of ego. His confidence was coming from a higher realm which is coming from beyond the physical manifestations. We are coming to that point in a bit, but essentially I'm trying to drive this point that whenever you see yourself, whenever you catch yourself from doing something which you know is the right thing and which is something which is close to your heart, and you are only not doing it because of the fear of public opinion, is because of the fear of failure, you, my friend, are doing a huge disservice to you. You are not engaging in self-love, instead you are engaging in self-hatred. Because every time you stop yourself, you are engaging in self-betrayal. Because the world will never applaud you completely. The great legends of the industries were not revered initially. They were criticized, they were ridiculed, and eventually they were revered. So always remember, be open for criticism. Be open for all kinds of opinions. If you are expecting that the world will applaud and they will garland you because you are following your heart, probably not, right? But sooner or later, the more you face your fears, the more you look at the fears in the eye, the more you are evolving. As the name of my channel, Evolving Consciousness, the more you are evolving your own consciousness, you are going to let the lower states of your emotion, the lower emotions like fear, you're not going to allow them to impede your progress. So the number 2 hack is take proactive action, and don't expect that you will be successful. The way we learn a bicycle, any toddler when he learns bicycling, or any toddler when he learns to walk, there are innumerable times when he falls, when he fails, but that doesn't stop the toddler from learning the bicycle, learning to balance the bicycle, and learning to walk. He continues, he perseveres, and one day there comes a time when he perfects the art of walking or the art of cycling. The same simple rudimentary principles apply to life as well. The more you practice facing your fears, the more powerful and confident you become. And now coming to the third hack, which I probably think is the ultimate hack towards going towards fearlessness. As per Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna says in the 16th chapter that fearlessness is a quality of godly beings. Now, one thing to be very careful about, right? There are people out there who are not spiritual, who claim to be very confident from within. But don't always judge a book by its cover. Never ever judge a book by its cover. These people who showcase themselves to be very confident but they lack a spiritual foundation, their confidence is very shaky. It's not constant. Their confidence is like the signals of the heartbeat of a human being. They can be confident when life is great with them. When life turns a curveball with them, they are not at a stable state of mind. They either become too remorse or too angry, agitated. Now, this is not fearlessness. Understand this, a person who becomes aggravated or someone who is extremely angry, that is also a manifestation of fear. Don't think that angry people are not scared. Angry people, to the contrary, are the most scared people. Now, once you understand the subtle variations of fear, because fear is like a chameleon, it changes colors. Not every fear seems like fear. Fear can manifest itself as anger. Fear can manifest itself as procrastination. Fear can manifest itself as talking ill of others. Fear can also manifest as jealousy. Now, you might also hear people around you who love to gossip about others, who like to pull down the achievements of other people. Now, essentially, these people are insecure people. They don't like what the other person is doing or what the other person is accomplished. Hence, they're trying to pull down in this attempt of making them feel good. Because essentially, these people, when they pull the other person down, it gives them a false sense of security. It sort of boosts down an insecure person's ego. That's why they engage in gossip. So fear has a lot of different manifestations. So we probably can assess what are the different subtle manifestations we have of fear. Now, talking about the third and the ultimate hack is to understand and deeply contemplate the teachings of Bhagavad Gita. When Arjuna was absolutely lamenting and frustrated with the sights of the warriors and the fact that he had to kill his own people, in the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna reminds Arjuna of his true nature, of the fact that he is a spiritual being having a temporary human experience, of the fact that the soul, which is our true identity, is something which is eternal, which cannot be cut, which cannot be disrespected, which cannot be affected by the material aspects of life. If you think about it deeply, all the thoughts which we think, right, on a day-to-day basis, they are all rooted to our identity. Our current identity, which whatever we identify ourselves with, those are the kind of thoughts which we generally get in our mind. Just think about it. Let's say that I am this person, I am working in a multinational company, and I have certain life situations in my life, and most of my thoughts are revolving around those aspects. But once I change that identity, or I realize that the identity which I am referring to as myself is essentially not my true identity. It's a temporary identity, and there's no denying that. But I am something which is beyond the physical dimensions, something which is eternal. And also, the number one reason why we are scared in general, right? Because we are trying to derive happiness from the temporary things. We are trying to make the temporary eternal. Now, this is the most foolish way to function. Once we understand the impermanence of life, the fact that things are temporary, the fact that happiness and sadness are all cycles, they are the same dualities of the same spectrum. They are two sides of the same coin. Then we will suddenly understand that I was being scared for nothing. Now, this is a very high level of divine consciousness which I am talking about. But to give you a very brief understanding, the only way to become absolutely fearless and to understand is to understand our true identity and to connect ourselves with something which is highly above the physical manifestations. Is to connect with spiritual wisdom and spiritual understanding in the right context. Unless we do that, we might have superficial gains in confidence. We may superficially feel ourselves to be confident. But if we want a permanent and a paradigm shift in our consciousness, spirituality is the only answer. And spirituality is essentially re-establishing the lost identity which we have absolutely forgotten from time immemorial. The identity that we are eternal souls in this body playing our different roles and responsibilities, but we are aware of our true identity. That right now we are absolutely not even aware of who we are and what we are. We only associate ourselves with our body, with our mind, with our achievements, with our accolades. And most of us think that the more we achieve, the more we hoard, the fear will reduce within us. Because now we are more secure. But what if I told you, the more you hoard, the more you have to lose, right? I mean, the meaning I'm trying to derive out of this is that the more a person hoards in his life, the more success he achieves, he's always going to feel more insecure that what if all these things are snatched away from him? Now, this is the reason why such famous celebrities commit suicide, because they are deeply insecure. Because they have never had the glimpse, the understanding that happiness is beyond these material aspects. They have never developed the higher taste for things. And because of that, they are petrified with fear. And when the very things which they associated the sense of identity and the sense of happiness is snatched away from them, they collapse, they lament. But once you connect with the spiritual wisdom, the wisdom of Bhagavad Gita, which is such a powerful and empowering text, then fearlessness becomes a natural way of being. Prabhupada once had given a beautiful quote. He said, "To avoid fearlessness to common man is the greatest act of charity." To avoid fearlessness to the common man is the greatest act of charity. Now, most of us, when we talk about being philanthropic, or serving humanity in general, we only restrict it to the physical dimensions, like serving people, giving some monetary donations to people, or feeding a bunch of people with food. Now, I'm not saying those are not good things, but let me give you an example. Let's say that there's a person and you regularly supply him something to eat, versus let's say that there's another person, instead of feeding him on a day-to-day basis, he empowers that person with a certain skill, a skill which sort of empowers him to earn his own bread. Which do you think is a better kind of service? The latter, right? So essentially, when you captivate, when you empower people with this spiritual wisdom, you are not doing a low level, you're not doing a charity which is not only going to feed their material senses, but you are empowering the person to automatically be able to acquire all those things. Hence, it is very important to serve in this fashion. Serving spiritual knowledge is probably the highest form of service. Now, this is not to demean the other forms of service, those services are also essential. But the highest form of service is to connect people with spiritual wisdom and spiritual knowledge, because this will empower them for eternity, not some random things which will give them a temporary relief, but an everlasting relief, a permanent solution to all the material fears and anxieties, is to connect with higher wisdom, is to connect with the spiritual identity which we all have lost in ourselves, which we have all completely been oblivious to. Hope my today's video was a sort of an eye-opener video for you to contemplate and sort of introspect as to what are the fears and what are the subtler fears within us, and to take proactive steps to make us more fearless. Also, in Bhagavad Gita, there's a lot of focus and emphasis on a lot of subtle dimensions, and the ultimate in the chapter number 18 of Bhagavad Gita, which is the last chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna talks about the power of surrender. He says, abandon all religions, all belief systems, all traditions, all thought processes, and just surrender unto me. Now, surrender is not such an easy thing which seems relieving to hear for the very first time. But surrender is probably the highest form of spiritual perfection. And the more you surrender, the more you are able to let go of the things which don't serve you, the more you are going to feel yourself at ease. And this is the secret to eternal peace and the secret to becoming absolutely fearless. Thank you so much for your time on my video, and if you really loved the video, don't forget to share with a couple of your friends, because let's understand, spreading spirituality is probably the highest form of service anyone can engage in, so that they also benefit from this wisdom, and hopefully they get motivated to start reading the Bhagavad Gita, because that is the epitome of all spiritual literature around the world. Also, do subscribe to my channel if you are enjoying the genre of content which I am sharing in my channel. Also, give me your candid feedback as to what are the things which you liked about the video and what are the things which can improve, which could be improved. I will certainly consider your constructive criticism, and I will try to improve myself, as I am also in a journey of improving myself, and I am a work in progress as well, just like you. Thank you so much, and I'll meet you in the next video.